Okay, listeners out there, try as hard as you can never to have $1 billion. All right? Don't have $1 billion. You don't want $1 billion. It's just a total burden and work. Yeah, 100 million, fine, but don't have $1 billion.
Our distinguished guest today is Kevin Kelly, a renowned technology enthusiast and visionary co-founder of Wired magazine, where he served as its executive editor for the formative first 7 years. Kevin, known as the senior maverick at Wired, is also a successful author, with his works frequently featured on the New York Times and Wall Street Journal bestselling lists. His books, such as New Rules for the New Economy and Out of Control, delve into the depths of decentralized emergent systems and technology theories, while his graphic novel, The Silver Cord, explores the intricate intersection between robots and angels. One of his most recent work was a book called The Inevitable, and it is already cementing his reputation as a leading voice in technology discourse. Beyond books and magazines, Kevin's expertise shines through as the founding editor and co-publisher of Cool Tools, a popular website that has been diligently reviewing tools since 2003. From 1984 to 1990, he held the helm as the publisher and editor of the Whole Earth Review, bringing unconventional technical news to the public's attention. A true pioneer in digital connectivity, Kevin co-founded the annual Hackers Conference and played a pivotal role in launching Well, one of the earliest online services, back in 1985. Join us as we delve into Kevin's fascinating journey through the technology landscape and explore his insightful views on the future of this ever-evolving domain. So Kevin, can you share with us the inspiration behind co-founding Wired magazine, and what was your vision for it at the time?
We wanted, first of all, to be very clear that I was one of the co-founders. There were a number of people involved in this. And we wanted to make a magazine that we wanted to read. There was no source. There was no publication covering the news that we wanted to hear. Keep in mind, of course, this is before the web. So it had to be on paper. That was in mail to you, basically. And so there were a bunch of us who were in our 40s, and we were otherwise unemployable in the sense that we did not have traditional careers. And we were sort of slightly contrarian in many respects. And we came together to make a magazine that we thought we'd like to read. And I had kind of tried to make a magazine like this from the basis of the magazine I was editing at that time, which was this unorthodox technical news. I had something called Signal. I had a magazine called Signal that I was trying to start up. It was unlikely to have maybe gone very far, because while the ideas were correct, it was missing the ingredient. And that ingredient came with Louis Rossetto, who was the primary co-founder of Wired. And his idea was to take these kind of large ideas, conceptual ideas that I was working with, and wrap it around people and wrap people around it. Make the magazine about the culture and the people around the technology and the ideas, to make heroes out of the nerds. And he said something else to me that convinced me that this would work. He says, I want to make a magazine that feels like it's been mailed back from the future. And I thought, oh yeah, okay. I'm on board. That's what we want to do. And that's what we were trying to do. We were trying to make it feel like it was being mailed back from the future. And so we were making this magazine that we wanted, and the business proposition was the difficult part because there was nothing else like Wired. There was no category. Newsstands didn't know where to put it. The advertising sales didn't know who to sell ads to. And we said, no, we want to make a technology lifestyle magazine. People would say, what? That doesn't make any sense. There's computer magazines. You can have computer ads, but what's a technology lifestyle? What's the technology lifestyle? So it was an uphill battle, but we were imagining, and the business proposition that we made to the advertisers was, look, there are all these technology people who are very involved in it, and nobody's talking to them. But we can reach them because we're going to make a magazine that they want to read. And that's what happened. So we were full of near-death experiences. I mean, the number of times when we were this close to failure and bankruptcy was again and again. And so it looks kind of inevitable. And if I'm looking at the past, of course, but it was not at all clear at the time that this was actually going to work. But we believed that it could, and we were making a magazine for ourselves, is the short answer.
Can you describe what some of the biggest challenges you faced during those early years at Wired?
Well, getting advertisers, because getting subscribers, the main business of magazines, the main customer is not the readers, it's actually the advertisers. Okay. And so we could find readers, we were pretty sure, and we did. But finding advertisers was a big hurdle because there's branding issues. Companies with money are very concerned about who they become associated with in the magazine. So if they put an ad in some kind of crummy, rotten magazine or whatever it is, it hurts the brand. So they're very reluctant to try anything new. And then there was this other thing, what's the category? So like if you're selling computers, sure, you go into a computer magazine. Who's going to advertise in Wired? We said we want clothing advertisements. We want the high-end stuff. And they're saying, in a computer magazine? And we're saying, well, it's not really a computer magazine. No, it's something different. It's like a lifestyle magazine. And so it was a very hard sell, just convincing people because they hadn't seen it. But even when they had seen it, it was like, what is this? What is this stuff? I don't get it. Who can read this? What's this about? And so there was a very long process of people kind of coming to understand that the nerds, the technical people, was the center of the culture. There was a tendency to think that this was marginal. This was kind of like teenage boy stuff. We're saying, no, this is going to be the center of the culture. We want to make the nerds cool, and this will be cool, and you want to advertise with us because it's cool. It was not cool when we began. They were the AV guys. They were the geeks and the nerds, and they were not cool. And so that was part of the uphill battle.
I will say, as a kid, if I was looking at a range of magazines and I saw Wired, I picked up Wired every single time. It was absolutely my favorite magazine growing up.
Right. But were you a nerd?
Kinda, I guess. A little bit.
Well, anyway, yeah, and so now everybody says it's kind of obvious. We see what it is. Wired does have competition now. It's very obvious that this is the technological is the center in some ways of the culture. The screen is no longer books and printed material. It's the screen. All that now seems very, very cliche and commonplace, but it was definitely not the process before.
So when you were with Wired, you held the executive editor for 7 years, if I recall. And I'm curious, even now, how has your understanding of technology and say its relationship to our society, how has it changed in your view? Like, are we headed towards a apocalypse because of technology?
Wired has always been the most optimistic, and I've become even more optimistic than I was before. I'm now radically optimistic. And even when we start, optimism was not in fashion. There was kind of there was a recession at the time. And now the state of the world, what's changed over the 30 years. Wired started 30 years ago. It's amazing. So what's changed over 30 years is now whenever something new comes along, the very first question that people have is, how's this going to bite? How's this going to hurt? What's wrong? What's wrong with it? Everybody knows that there's a downside to technology, and now it's the first thing we say. It's not like, oh, that's cool. No, it's like, oh, how's that going to hurt? And so that kind of bias is now kind of the resident stance for most things. We don't go, ooh, ah, we go, no, I'm not sure. And so, so we have to overcome some of that, which is to say there's a whole rant about why we should be optimistic. And so that's part of my job now, is to continue the optimism. I think Wired is less optimistic than it was. In part, it's kind of, it's older, it's kind of more mature, it's run by different people who aren't as optimistic as we were. And by the way, when we were running it, we were total owners, and it was fun because we could do whatever we wanted to, and we wanted to always push things to the edge. Now it's owned by Condé Nast, and the editor is for hire, and they have to be a little concerned about the bottom line, where we were like, push it to the floor and just let it go. And so, so I understand that. But my job is to help people become more optimistic than they might ordinarily, because I think it's only if we look at all the great things we have today, they were built by some crazy optimists in the past who believed that thing was not only possible, but that it could be real. And that is the kind of optimism that we need to make great things.
Right. I think you have in your book that we should be optimistic because optimistic people solve problems, but it seems like our society is engulfed in a culture war, and we're not focusing on solving problems. The problems seem to be neglected, at least in the media sense. So how do we orient ourselves to remain optimistic when we see so much conflict?
Yeah, so the short answer is that I'm optimistic, not because I think the problems of the world aren't real or big or serious. They are. I acknowledge all those problems. But I believe that our ability to solve the problems is even greater than we think, and greater than they're increasing even faster than our problems. And so also, I think there are plenty of people who are focused on our problems, which is good. And I'm glad that they're there, and that's necessary. And they're doing that job really well. There are just not enough people who are focused on our opportunities and our strengths, and who believe that we can do seemingly impossible things, and want to make them happen. And so some of those things are big things, and we've kind of stopped making really big things. We're kind of almost allergic to building big things. People are totally suspicious of anything big. Lots of people say they're anti-capitalist, but I think they're kind of anti-big. And they just, big things of any sort, just give them the hives. And so we're now at the scale, we have a planetary economy, we have planetary problems. We have to do planetary solutions that they're going to be big. And we have an allergy to bigness right now, which I think is preventing us from being optimistic, because we have to make some big things. And so I believe that if we can become more optimistic and believe that we can increase our ability to solve problems faster than the problems, then I think we can then imagine some big things and then believe that they could be made, and then that will help make them come true.
Yeah, I think today we have, I don't know if we would characterize it as an epidemic, but a lot of the people who become entrepreneurs, they're building apps, maybe they're selling online courses, but the default for an entrepreneur today has drastically changed, or the definition at least, from where it was 30 years ago.
Yes, and even 30 years ago was quite a change from, say 30 years before that. So when I was growing up, I remember this very distinctly, in the 60s. My father had a friend who was doing a startup. And at that time, in the 50s and 60s, if you were doing if you had a business that you were going to start a business. It wasn't called a startup. You were going to start a business. That was often code for that you were unemployed or that you were fired or whatever. It was not something cool. It was like totally crazy talk. for someone to imagine that they're going to start a business. It was just so unusual. People were not, everybody was trying to work for a Fortune 500 company. That was the cool thing. Going off and starting your own business was like, I wouldn't say it was for losers, but it was almost like that. It was like, poor guy. And so that's kind of switched around with the rise of Silicon Valley, where starting your own business and being cool and working for a startup became the thing that everybody wanted to do. This is new. This is a very new thing. And that's, still changing right now, even as we speak, in terms of what people expect and what it means and what's entailed. And also, right now, there's startups, but with the DAO and other kind of stuff, crypto, there's this idea that you can actually have other kinds of organizations to do work. So it may be that maybe in 20 years from now, the cool thing is to be part of a co-op, working with some kind of a DAO-driven, planetary level co-op, whatever it is. So things will change.
Your take on optimism and society and trying to help others be more optimistic, I commend you for that, because it's way easier to be pessimistic about the future. Yeah. And in your TED Talk from 2021, you gave an account that we should be optimists about the future, because it has always been the optimists who created the solution to the problems that has improved people's lives. So I have to admit, I've always been a little bit on the pessimistic side, and I still feel pessimistic about the future. In your talk, you didn't really give any specific insight or questions, perhaps. If somebody is a pessimist and they want to become more of an optimist, especially about the future, what advice would you give them?
I think the easiest and the primary advice is to take a longer view, to take the long view, both in the past and the future. So if you take a long view in the past and actually look at the scientific evidence, the impartial accounts of what has happened in the last couple hundred years, or even the last 100 years, you have to acknowledge that progress has been real, that it's much better to be alive. If you have a time machine that could send you to any year, but you were going to be born as a random person, maybe slave, maybe king, maybe other, and maybe with gender, all randomly, what year do you want to be sent to? There is no way any sane person would go back into the past and choose a path, because you're likely to have a pretty rough life, because progress has been real. So the conditions of that progress are still with us. So it's very statistically likely that it'll continue. So that's the first thing. Have a long view of the past. And the other one is have a long view of the future. So we can be optimistic, because if we can just create just a few percent more than we make every year, then we can be optimistic if you take a long view. If you take a long view of 10 or 20 years, then it's incredible what we can accomplish in that. And any kind of even major downturns and setbacks don't really register. They're easily overcome if you take a longer view. If you just take the short view, then you're kind of stymied by these volatility and the ups and downs and the wars, temporary wars here and there. But if you take a longer view, you can say, oh yeah, we're going to be a lot better in 20 years. This is going in a good direction. So that's what I would say. Take a longer view.
Well, not to beat a dead horse, but I had some thoughts come up that could be this alternative version where we look at, say, our government today. It's kind of become almost like a puppet government, like nothing gets done in Congress. And it seems that you have all the lobbying companies who get them to sign bills that aren't really in the best interest of the people. And we have a diminishing of power at the president. And so it seems like things are certainly a little turbulent, even perhaps more turbulent in terms of American society than they were 20, 30 years ago. We no longer have nationalism, because we have nationalism within nationalism, because there's so many different tribes and packs that all kind of seem to separate each other. So it's creating more hostility towards other groups. And I can't help but wonder how are we going to solve that? Is it just look back at historically things have gotten better? So I'm curious if you have any
Yeah.
thoughts.
Well, like, okay, first of all, there's two things. One is, I was saying, a longer view will help your optimism. The second thing will be a more global view. So you were mentioning U.S. politics, U.S. stuff. Increasingly, the U.S. doesn't matter as much. China plus India together has 10 times the population of the U.S. 10 times. And they're increasingly going to become very modern and play a tremendous role in the world, as we can see right now with China alone, let alone India. So it's very parochial to think about the world in terms of just the U.S. The U.S. is weird in many ways. It's a very weird country in terms of, I mean, literally exceptional in terms of lots of things, including, like, say, guns, right? I mean, it's just way off the charts. So I think it's very parochial to just talk about U.S. politics in terms of the future, because it is increasingly not as important as it was. And secondly, talking about the weirdness and the dysfunction of, say, U.S. politics is, man, all I can say is you obviously have not read enough U.S. history. Read about the U.S. history even 100 years ago, and you'll see like they were totally bonkers. I mean, it's just crazy. Vice presidents shooting, political rivals. It's the depth of what was going on isn't really appreciated. We romanticize the past because the politics of the past were even worse than they are today in terms of how you got things done and what was the deals that were being made and the craziness. And so that's what I meant by taking a longer view. If you really read what was going on, even say like 30, 40 years ago, it was not pretty. There was no sense in which that was a golden pass for politics. Come on, it was pretty ruthless. So I think that's what I would say is elevate the horizon and then widen the view to a planetary view, because that is the future. We're having a planetary future. We're no longer, there isn't even national economies. There's only global economies at this point. We're all meshed in together. And we're kind of stuck with China no matter what. And it's like, well, what do we want to have that relationship? It's like, we're going to have some kind of relationship with them. We just cannot decouple entirely.
I assume you're a Elon fan.
I was an Elon fan of the prior Elon. Current Elon, I don't know. He's there's what's the word I want? Yeah, I'll stop right there. I was a fan of the former Elon.
Okay. Kind of switching gears, I wanted to mention about you being the co-founder of the Hackers Conference. And I think hacking is a very misunderstood part of society. Can you tell me about what led you to co-found this Hackers Conference?
Yeah. So hacking was a term that came out of MIT, and it was applied to originally the railroad engineer guys who were kind of making large systems, and they were exploring, and they called that hacking, and they would make up weird stuff, and they called that hacking. And it was a very, it was complimentary. It was not a derogatory term. It was a positive sense of hacking. That got hijacked in the 80s and especially in the 90s to talk about the nefarious and kind of the bad version of hacking, where you hack into something, you steal things. We made the Hackers Conference right at the cusp when we were trying to maintain the positive use of hacker and try to actually nudge the culture into accepting hackers as a positive term. It was based somewhat on the book by Stephen Levy called Hackers. So that Hackers Conference, as we originally envisioned, was to bring together the three generations of existing hackers who were programmers primarily and kind of part of the people that made the Silicon Valley culture. And so it was an attempt both to bring them together and to really seed this culture, and also to work a little bit in trying to nudge the association with the word hackers. I think we failed. It didn't work. People talk about hackathons and hacking. So in that sense, hacking is retained as a positive term, but hackers is still the negative.
Even like white hat hacker.
Yeah, even white hackers are kind of like, yeah, they're still hackers. They're still people that you may not want to trust, right? They're untrustworthy. And so but the original idea of the conference was in the white hat version of it, where these were people who were thinking about systems, and that's sort of what the hacking was they were looking at the telephone system, the early internet. They were, in some cases, the designers of them, but they were also the explorers of trying to figure out how it worked, how it broke, where it was going. And so the conference still runs today, but I have nothing to do with it. We left that long ago. It's independently run. It's mostly graybeards who attend. There are other conferences that have come up that have kind of replaced the Hackers Conference as an area where those alpha geeks got to meet and come together. Food Camp is one example of that. So it's not what it was, but at the time, it was part of this kind of white hat, bringing together, celebrating this idea of hacking, of exploring, trying stuff, doing as a way of thinking, making stuff. It was kind of like the earliest maker. The maker fair and the maker movement kind of came a little bit from this idea of the hacking and the hackathons.
I like to think that today, hacker isn't as stigmatized as it was in the past. I mean, you have Fortune 500 companies, they all have bug bounty programs. There is software written for you to submit bugs and get a bounty on that, and they make their whole living based on that.
I hope I'm wrong. I hope the hacker maintains some of that sense, but I think for most people, when they hear the word hacker, they don't associate with that. They associate with getting hacked.
On another note, you were involved in the launch of Well, a pioneering online service. Could you share a bit about that experience and how you like to see the evolution of online communities since?
Yeah, so kind of the internet's been around, but it was a very, very small, tiny, experimental network run by academics, primarily in universities. And during that period of time, there was the popular bulletin boards, which were basically little servers, we would call them today, that ran in people's bedrooms. And you had to use a phone modem, literally landline, to get in. And they could accommodate one or two people at a time, the most. So you had conversation by people coming in, logging in, leaving their comments, exiting. The next person would come in, leave their comments. And that was called the bulletin. It was like posting up on the bulletin board, and you could go read the comments and come back. But they were virtual, ASCII online. And that was the online world. And then we started something called The Well, which was a jacked up version of that. It was really big. I mean, we could have, I forget how many, maybe 30 people on at once. We had 30 modems, and each modem could have maybe one or two people, I don't remember, coming in by the phone line. So there was a way to kind of have like a bigger scaled up bulletin board with the same idea. People would log on, you leave your comments in a thread, and then you would log off, leaving room for another person to log on. That was called The Well. And there were other kind of evolutions where you could have threaded conversations. You could start more than one thread. So it was better and improved in the bulletin board in that way. And eventually, it kind of grew and grew in the number of people that we could get on. And at that time, it was still something where you had to call in to that number. And the internet was this idea that you could get on the internet and then go anywhere. And we wanted to put The Well onto the internet. And that was a really, really big project, because even AOL and CompuServe, all these other ones were not on the internet. They were all separate. You could only send mail to within that. So in the beginning, you could only send mail to anybody on the well, but nobody outside the well because it wasn't on the internet. And so we wanted to put the well onto the internet, and it took a very, very long time because at that time, the NSF, National Science Foundation, ran the internet, and they prohibited commercial use. They said only you needed a university or non-commercial address, and they were afraid that it would be used for commercial use. And we said, well, it's crazy because that's where it's going. But anyway, we eventually made an agreement where people would have to sign a waiver saying they're not going to use it for commercial use in order to get onto the well. But at that point, when we did, we actually had the first public access to the internet. So if you paid $8 a month to the well for this bulletin board, you could have an address that would allow you to send email anywhere else on the internet. There was no other way to do it unless you worked for a university or a big corporation. So that's what the well was. It was basically the first public online ramp to the internet.
And whatever ended up happening with it.
So the problem with it was you needed kind of command line coding. It was ASCII, just green screen. And what was coming was the graphical user interface. The well was a nonprofit, and I never figured out a way to get the necessary investment that needed to grow in a nonprofit. There are ways to do that today. OpenAI just did the whole thing where they raised billions of dollars, even though they were a nonprofit. So we should have been more creative in figuring out a way to get investment into this nonprofit. And so we couldn't scale up. We never went to a graphical user interface. AOL came along and everything else just ran past it. However, I would say that the well continues. It's still working today. There's still some of the same people on who like that old scale retro feel. They eventually did make a graphical user interface, the web. They did a web version of it. So it is accessible. So for people who want a bit of history, they can go to the well and get an account, and you can have your conversations in an old school way. But it was very influential. Steve Case and other people who did AOL and went crazy and took over the world, they were paying attention. They were on the well looking at what we were learning, but we didn't have the foresight to actually scale up and remain a contender. So that was, I would say, a failure, and probably on my part.
At that time, so you still had a job at Wired, and so was this just the side project that you were trying to launch into something, but it started as a nonprofit, so you weren't really attempting to necessarily make money? You were just doing it for the sake of doing it because you saw this new technology and you saw how you could put it together in a way that could benefit others.
This was long before Wired. This was when I was at Whole Earth.
Okay.
This is in 84, 85 when we started. So I was working for Whole Earth, which was a nonprofit. Or I was running Whole Earth, which was a nonprofit. And that's 7 years before Wired. So when Wired came along, Wired was just at the beginning of the web. And the year after, or even later in the year that the Wired began, the web began. And we were very involved in developing the web and inventing the web as it is. And so that was the project. And once the web started, the well seemed less important because now you could do lots of the things that the well was trying to do. The web was doing even better.
You've been around since the beginning of the internet. I'm wondering if you have any thoughts, whether it's on AI or predictions about the next major shift in technology. Like, where do you think we're headed?
Yeah. So I think over the long term, and not in the next year, not in 2 years, maybe not in 5 years, but over the next decade, I think where we're going to is what I would call the spatial web, 3D web. sometimes called the mirror world, what I call it. Sometimes some people call it the metaverse, although that's very confusing, which is this idea that you have spatial. So we would be doing this, but within 3 dimensions, like a VR or augmented reality. We'd have smart glasses and goggles and other things, but that we would be interfacing in 3 dimensions, and there would be a 3-dimensional web on top of the actual physical world. And so it's called the spatial web. And AI is going to help that, because a lot of the content you might need can't really be generated unless you have AI kind of in the back. It's not something you would feel or see, but be working in the background to do the rendering, to do the modeling, to do all the kinds of navigation and sensing that you need, the mapping that you need to have a spatial web. So I think that's where we're going. But as I said, I think it's like driverless cars. We can kind of see it, and we mistake often that for being a clear vision. We mistake for being close. I think completely self-driving cars as a mainstream thing is still decades away. And I think even though we can see this spatial web, I think it's many decades away.
And so when you say the metaverse, are you referring to Mark Zuckerberg's metaverse, or a metaverse in general, this layer between physical reality and reality?
So lots of people are using it in different terms, including, Neil Stevens, who invented the term. I use it in the term of what I call the mirror world, meaning that it's not as well when you're wearing the glasses or the viewers for that world, they're see-through. So you see the real world, and you have an overlay on top of that. That is what I would call the metaverse or the mirror world. And rather than the virtual reality where you have opaque glasses and you see only an alternative world. Okay, you don't see the real world, you see an alternative imaginary world. That's what you get with VR. That's what the Oasis was. But the mirror world, or the metaverse, depending what you want to call it, it's the real world with the virtual laid on top of it. And you can kind of see both, switch back and forth. They're merged together. So it's a really big thing that will occur to most people. They'll see it first at work. Lots of people who don't have desks will be using this, warehouses and training and doing physical things, even making virtual screens. I just saw this the other day, a new version of this where you can get 12 screens, as many screens as you want, as big as you want. And they're the same resolution as looking at this screen here, but they're all just from your virtual. So you see the room, it's like your room, but there's actual screens there that are virtual, and you can use them in the same way that I would use them, in the same resolution, but they're just virtual screens. So that's the kind of way we're going to see it at first.
Okay. I want to switch to the meat and potatoes, which is your book, Excellent Advice for Living, Wisdom I Wish I'd Never Known Earlier by Kevin Kelly. So my first question, it's a little long, but...
There it is.
Yep. That's great.
Yeah.
Kevin, on your 68th birthday, you embarked on a beautiful project of writing down life lessons and wisdoms for your young adult children, lessons you wish you had known earlier. As time went on, this compilation expanded, covering a wide range of topics from ethical living to setting ambitious goals to generosity, compassion, and practical advice on career, relationships, parenting, finances, travel, and troubleshooting. Can you share with us what inspired you to start this endeavor and how it evolved over the years into a compilation of valuable advice?
Yeah. I've always collected little compact sayings and quotes and proverbs. I liked them. I liked their form factor. I liked having them reduced their knowledge and wisdom into a little kind of like a zip file. and who you can unzip a whole book of advice just from that one little sentence. And I started to write my own versions of it for advice, thinking of my kids, whom we did not give a lot of specific advice to. We kind of try to model our lives rather than telling them, because I think kids don't really listen to their parents, but they tend to watch what their parents do. And so I began writing these down, and then at a certain point I realized I had enough to gift them to my adult kids. And they went very well. They shared them. I shared them. They went kind of viral, and I realized that there was a lot there. So I kept doing it a year after year after year, adding more. And what I was trying to do was literally remind myself of things that I knew. Maybe the ancients had been passed on and people have talked about forever, kind of like maybe information that's not new, but I was trying to put into my own words, plus new things that just were things that I just picked up in living for 70 years that I thought I really do wish I had known this earlier. Someone had told me earlier. And so I try to put those into a book format over time, because even though they're on the internet, it's kind of hard to collect, and it's really handy to have them into something that you could gift to somebody. So that was the origin. It was in some ways written for myself to remind myself to change my behavior. So I think of these as 450 reminders. Things that maybe you didn't know, or things that you just learned that you should be reminded of every now and then.
And so it's funny that you say that, because I'm actually, we're just weeks away from launching an app. It's called Mental Reminders. And I found that there was no other app out there that does this. It's not a task app. What it does is you can insert knowledge, little sayings, idioms, tidbits. You watch a TV show or a conversation, you insert it into the app. You can categorize it with like a label, awareness or stress, and then you can set it up so that it will randomly choose from your entries. Say every morning, it will randomly choose an item that you have previously entered into this database to send you as a push notification on your phone. So every day you will get 3 push notifications in the morning, afternoon, and evening, and it will remind you of these things that you want to remember. But most people don't have the discipline of having what you would call a commonplace book and actually going through that on a regular basis. So I'm trying to make up for that by kind of putting it into an app. So a lot of the things in your book, I think, would be fantastic for the app. I'm certainly going to add it to mine.
Yeah, I think that's what it is. It's reminders. And that's the origin of it. And I use the book myself. I mean, I put this into this kind of a form of little sayings to enable me to remind myself, because, it's like if a goal does not have a schedule, it's just a dream. So you want to give a schedule. You want to have deadlines. I remind myself all the time, give myself a deadline. Deadlines are good to help you ship. And so that's the kinds of advice that the book is filled with.
I'd like to go over some of the advice that stood out to me from the book. Let's see. So you had a quote: being able to listen well is a superpower, while listening to somebody you love, and keep asking until there is no more.
Right. Yeah. So the idea is you ask them what it is that they feel or thinking, and you ask them 3 times until there's no more. You say, is there more? And then, is there more? And that 3rd time, they're going to be saying something close to the truth, because they've said the kind of obvious and easy things to say. And that kind of, the rule of 3 is really good. It's used in therapy all the time, particularly couples therapy, where they're trying to get to the bottom of something important. The sayer almost needs the listener to help them draw it out of them, because they're probably incapable. Oftentimes you're incapable of saying it because you don't even know what it is. And it's that act of being asked to go deeper and deeper that actually kind of reveals it and allows that person to say it. And so the two, when you're listening, you're actually doing a service to the speaker by deliberately receiving what it is and enabling them together to go down to that third level to say something important.
Where did this come from, this particular quote?
This particular one came from a very famous, the practice came from a very famous therapist, Esther Perel, who's a very famous marriage counselor. And it's a technique that she uses in her therapy. So there's another rule of three in the book. And this is the rule of three for danger or survival, which is the universal appeal for help is 3 of something. 3 whistle calls, 3 blasts, 3 drums, 3 screams, 3 yells. So you do something 1, 2, 3, and that is the signal of help needed, help wanted.
SOS.
SOS. 3, if all you have is a stick that you're going to whack a tree, you do it 3 times. You take a whistle, you do 3 whistles, and you just repeat that. And that's the universal call for help.
Another one is that no is an acceptable answer without a reason.
Yeah.
How can we become more comfortable with this?
Yeah, that took me a long time to learn. I learned it a little bit from my mentor, Stuart Brand, who did another version of the idea is you don't have to give an excuse when you say no. You need to do it politely and gently. And you can also do it in a way that makes it seem a favor to the other person that you said no. And that's actually the best way. So, where you don't, it's like, I can't give you the kind of attention and care that this needs, so therefore I have to say no. So saying no is firmly and gently is a great skill to have.
It reminded me of a book I read a while back called When I Say No, I Feel Guilty by Manuel Smith. And I think this is the premier book that is helpful if you're somebody who always feels like you can't say no to certain people or requests, because eventually you can give and give and give until you have nothing left.
Sure.
And so just like the saying of put on your mask first is an important concept that I think a lot of people, just out of the good of their heart, aren't able to say no.
Yep.
Another one you have here is perhaps the most counterintuitive truth of the universe is the more you give, the more you get. Can you explain this?
It's so weird. There's a paradox that the most selfish thing you can do, is to be generous. The most selfish thing you can do is give stuff away. That's like really weird. And it's because the more you give, the more you get. And that mathematics doesn't work. If everybody was giving away more than they were getting, where's it coming from? But it's true. So there's this weird necessary paradox at the center. And it's true for time, it's true for kindness, it's true for so many things that that's one thing I've changed my mind about over time, is that I now understand that the default human behavior is selflessness, not selfishness. That people will generally trust a stranger, be kind to you, giving your best, be selfless if you give him at all the chance to do so. And yes, if you do that, if you trust strangers, if you assume everybody is nice, if you assume that everybody is selfless, then every once in a while you are going to be cheated or robbed. But if you count up all the blessings you've had, you'll realize that that's just a small tax that you should be willing to pay gladly in order for the huge gains that you've gotten from people giving you the best because you've treated them the best.
Have you read the book Give and Take by Adam Grant?
I have not.
That is the premier book on why helping others drives our own success.
Add it to my list.
Very, very well written book and informative that expands a lot on top of that really solid piece of advice. See, another one's keep showing up. 99% of success is just showing up. Most success is just persistence.
And we can accomplish so much in 10 years, miraculous amounts in 10 years that don't seem even possible to do in 6 months. And so if you're persistent over the long period of time, you can be unstoppable. Okay. And so that relentless showing up is basically that's the definition of professionalism. And professionals are like, you show up, you don't feel like it, but you're going to write again this morning because you're a professional and you're showing up. And so that's so important, where you're going to do the work even if you don't feel like, if you're not inspired, whatever it is, it doesn't matter. You're going to make crappy work today. That's fine. You need to make a lot of crap to get the good stuff. So you're just fulfilling your duties of showing up. And you do have to ask yourself every now and then if you should keep doing what you're doing. That's fine. You can question that. But if you do decide that that's what you should do, you need to keep showing up. It's just really remarkable how powerful that is.
Yeah. I started my first business at 14, and I had probably 7 or 8 different businesses, even in my 20s. A lot of them failed, but I kept going. So that's something that I think a lot of my peers couldn't meet. I mean, I was in a very special circumstance because my parents died. So I only saw one path forward. And it's like the Spanish conquistador who burned all of his ships. When there's no retreat, you only see one way forward. And I gritted it out and did what I needed to do.
Yeah. Yeah. And that goes to another, advice about failing and failing forward and failing fast and failing better, which is that you just need to do lots of things, most of which will fail, most of 90% of it, which is not going to be very good, in order to get to the great stuff. I've seen no other way. And anybody that I know who's been remarkable, even my own life, in terms of accomplishments, you have to generate a lot of stuff that is just going to be tossed or forgotten in order to make the great stuff. You can make good stuff kind of all right. And that's one of the problems with lots of corporate things, is that they can't afford to make really bad things, but they also aren't capable of making good things because they don't make the bad things. So you have to want to be able to, you have to be kind of free to generate a lot of crap. And that's the best way to do that, is just to do it on a regular basis. Keep showing up, and you'll be you'll inadvertently generate a lot of crap, but that's okay, because it's that exercise of filling it out and knowing that you have more where it came from, and just kind of producing it in a generous way, and saying, yeah, okay, that wasn't good, but I got more there. I'll do it again. And so that generosity, so to speak, is actually a key to really arriving at the great stuff.
I know we're short on time. Do you have a few more for just a few more points?
I have a few more, yes.
Okay, great. You have another one here. It's be more generous than necessary. There's no point in being the richest person in the cemetery.
Yes, that's true. That is true. It's sort of, you won't really regret being generous, again, because the weird thing is that, like if you say tithe or give away even up to 10% of what it is that you get in a year, you might miss that 10% of purchasing power, but it will pale in comparison to the other blessings that you'll get from giving it away, from sharing it. It's just remarkable how that works. So yeah, take the long view.
And that reminded me of another book. I haven't finished reading it yet, but it's called Die with Zero.
Yes,
And
it's a
it's
great book. It's fabulous. There's actually a previous book, not really acknowledged, that I liked called Die Broke. And both of them are talking about, well, Die with Zero is a little bit more enlarged, but the Die Broke one was really talking about being able to, if you're going to pass something on to the next generation, you should do it while you're alive because it's more fun. You have much more control. It's healthier to the recipients. And I've seen it with my own eyes. Inheriting a lot of money is a real burden. I mean, if we're talking about a lot of money, it's a real burden for people. Not at all a blessing as you might think. And so, you want to be very careful about doing that. And that's one way to be careful about doing it, is doing it while you're alive.
I- I've worked my entire life to get to a point where I can be independent, and I've achieved a level certain of financial success that I think most people can only dream of. But also, having sold my company, is I felt completely lost, like not sure what to do next. There's a great book called Second Mountain by David Brooks that helped to paint the picture, so to speak. Whereas most of us spend our first lives trying to get to the first mountain, which is fame, riches, glory, success.
Right.
But then you realize that the destination was the journey. And then we spend the rest of our lives trying to get to the second mountain, which is social connection, tribes, community, social impact. And so that's kind of where I'm at, is that I've made the money, but I also feel kind of miserable because I don't have a driving force, and I'm not sure what's next.
Right. Yeah, this is what I've said. It's like we're all kind of on this journey to understand the meaning of our life. And the other paradox of the universe is that the purpose of your life is to figure out the purpose of your life. Okay? That sounds completely ridiculous, but that's kind of what it's about. And the weird, again, the unusual, unexpected thing is that becoming famous and having $1 billion does not answer that question. Right? It actually makes it harder to answer the question. And if I have any advice that's not in the book for your listeners, it would be, okay, listeners out there, try as hard as you can never to have $1 billion. All right? Don't have $1 billion. You don't want $1 billion. It's just a total burden and warp. Yeah, 100 million, fine, but don't have $1 billion. And so it's terrible for your kids as well. And so the this journey of finding meaning in your life is a journey that will take most of your life to figure out, and it's not a destination. All the remarkable people that I know, the most accomplished, are still asking that question: is what do I want to do when I grow up? Okay, and as I said, having fame and other things is in the way now, and so you want to be setting off a course where, if at all possible, you wanted to invent a new way of being successful.
And I think as a last quote from your book, something that struck with me is, you say, before you are old, attend as many funerals as you can bear and listen. Nobody talks about the departed's achievements. Only thing people will remember is the kind of person you were achieving.
Yeah. Don't work to acquire, work to become, but pay a lot of attention who it is that you're becoming. And by the way, it will take everybody around you to help you become yourself. So you cannot truly become yourself by yourself. You need everyone else to help you become unique. Kind of weird. You need everyone else to help you become unique. You can't truly become yourself by yourself. And so we're on this journey of trying to figure out who we are and what we're meaning, and that the more you can find the meaning, the easier it's going to be to make a living. It's work. Again, it doesn't kind of make sense, but it does work out that way. The more that you are your only, the more that you are unique, the less you can be imitated by AI, by the way. The more conventional you are, the more you'll be AI replaceable. The more improbable you are and less predictable, the less likely you are going to be replaced by AI. So you want to be on a journey where you're kind of doing this improbable thing. The thing that made you weird as a kid can make you great as an adult if you don't lose it. So you want to keep that weirdness. You want to professionalize your weirdness in some ways, and head for that area where very few people are going. Maybe they don't know any names or what it is, and you're kind of headed in this direction that is more likely to be somewhere that's more you, where you can blossom your own unique talents and whatever. And so it's a hard thing. That's not easy. It's not as easy as like, I want to become an accountant or the best golf player in the world. Being the best golf player, it's a known thing. That's a movie that many people are occupied by. But you want to invent a new version of success, a new definition. I think that's where you want to go. So I really appreciate this time to chat with you. I hope some of this advice works for your listeners. There's a lot more, 450 little tiny sentences in this book. There's no stories. It's the Bible without stories. Someone said, yeah, that's right. There's no stories. It's all about these little proverbs. And I hope that they work for your fans and followers.
We'll include a link to his book in the show notes, and that's a wrap.